Stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker of Elkins Consulting.
When we share stories, whether in our personal or business lives, how we share them makes a difference in how we remember them and in how we're perceived by the people we're sharing them with. When you're listening to this podcast, I encourage you to listen and consider your own related stories. To listen and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way. And think about how you share those stories and the messages they carry for you and for the people who are hearing them.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe we haven't done this before. Today on my podcast, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, I am highlighting my dear friend, Heather Younger. And we met on LinkedIn years ago, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, and became soul sisters almost immediately, the first time we talked. And what I see as the building block of our relationship was when I first said, I'm thinking about doing this no longer virtual event to bring people together that have only met on LinkedIn and want to meet face to face. Would you consider being one of the facilitators for that event if I put together an agenda? And your first response, Heather, was, I'm in. Where? When? What do you need from me? So welcome, Heather, to the podcast. Finally, I can't believe it took us this long to get you on here.
Thank you. Yes, this is wonderful. It's been just amazing to see you along your journey. You just are a light in the world. So thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. So the first question I always ask on this podcast is I ask my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know about you. And it could be something from your childhood or young adulthood. And I love for our listeners to get a little bit of context.
Well, something that most people don't know is I actually was a sales director for Mary Kay Cosmetics. And the most interesting part about that is that I quit the practice of law to go do that. So I was practicing law, and I'm a kind of a natural marketer. And so I'd go to the chamber events and I would bring clients into the firm, but I could not stand actually doing the work once I got them there. And so I would go to this chamber event, and this one particular person, she was a Mary Kay sales director. I didn't know at that point, but she would always come up to me and she would have a conversation, and she'd invite me to events. And I just, every time I'd go to her events, I would see how the people were uplifted and how everybody was so excited and how they were changing lives. And I so wanted a piece of that because I felt like I was kind of withering at the vine practicing law. So I ended up literally, I quit the practice of law. Well, it quit me, I quit it. And then I went on to do that and earned cars and led a team of about 30 women. And it was fun, but I'm not some glamour queen, and I never was. And so I was kind of a tomboy even at the time. And so it was just funny to have it be the kind of person who was out there, toting cosmetics after having a law degree. So.
Oh my gosh. I had forgotten that. We talked about that years ago. And I thank you for sharing that, because that definitely puts things into context. And just before we hit record on this, we were talking about your strengths and StrengthsFinder, and woo is your number 4 or number 5. Is that right?
Yes.
And for our listeners, woo is winning others over. Now, this is people who are strong in woo are the people who will walk into a networking event of 100 people and walk out with 50 new friends. That's the woo. But yours is also combined with relator as your number 1 strength, which means that you don't necessarily like small talk.
Yeah,
that you really dive deep. And so
and empathy is my number 2. So
yes. So it's no wonder what you were doing in law didn't work for you. And I love the way you just told the story that totally demonstrates all of your top strengths in one little story of 5 minutes, which was, I would go to these chamber events and go to these events and bring in clients, but then I didn't want to do the work that was required once they got in the door.
Yep.
And that's because it was, the work once they got in there was all about law and kind of dry, and it didn't necessarily include personality and empathy.
Yep.
At least in the law that you were practicing at that time. Yep. So there are certainly lawyers that do practice those strengths in different contexts, but oh my gosh, I love that. I'd forgotten. Wonderful. I just can imagine you walking around with that little pink suitcase.
Well, I didn't quite have that, but yes, yeah. Then when I was there, they didn't quite have that. They may have had a little earlier than that, but it was actually the best thing I could have done for myself. I really do. I credit where I'm at today in my mind, probably equally with the law degree, because even though I'm not practicing the law degree, let's just be clear, it was advantageous for me to get it, and it's opened up a lot of doors. But the Mary Kay training and the ability early on to see that I had the strengths of developing people and that I had a desire and a passion to uplift others couldn't have been replaced, and their training was impeccable. So yeah, very good thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You mentioned years ago that you met the founder, right? Didn't you meet the founder, or you saw her speak?
Yes, because we went to conferences. Yeah, there were many. The thing about Mary Kay Cosmetics is that there were also lots of stories about her. I did see her, but it was this idea, and I even bring it up in this next book. This idea of her making people feel important. Her desire and her ability to make you feel like you were the most important specimen on this planet when you were in front of her, and so she just saw you completely, and that's kind of that gift, right? We just need to be better at that, all of us, to just be really truly seeing people, and that's what she had the gift to do.
That really is magic when you can be with somebody that can bring that to any environment and just be with you, even if it's just for 30 seconds or a minute, to be fully there. And I think about that a lot in terms of how we address the issues that we're facing right now in our global community, because I truly believe that it's the one-to-one relationships that are going to change things and improve things in our communities. So part of why I wanted to interview you now, of all the time that we've known each other, was because of your article on Biz Catalyst 360, that I will not meet hate at the door. And I've been thinking so much about that because of my experience with bigotry. As a Jewish woman, I had somebody in college looking for my horns. And that was in 1988. Because she grew up in a place where there weren't any Jews, and this was what she was told, was that Jews were a product of the devil. And what's ironic is that my mom had that exact same experience when she was a freshman in college, 20 years before that or 30 years before that. So, so your experience really, it really hit me that this is really an important topic, is that whole being an ambassador for your people in every conversation you have. And my friend Michelle Talbert years ago said, but it's exhausting, because she is also a Black woman in a professional life and just incredibly talented and smart and inspiring. And she said, it's just exhausting.
You know, I try to be very clear with people when I'm talking to them that I represent a voice, but not the voice. And in fact, I don't think any one person can, because as you know, like the experience and the voices are not homogenous. We are different people. We have different backgrounds. Like some people have been pulled over. Some people have not. Some people have been arrested. Some people have not. Like there's all these different experiences, right? Mm-hmm. And so even though I have seen narrow-minded thinking both in my family and outside of it, and I've had little things here and there, I can't say that I've had the experience of a Black man, right? I can't say that I've had experience of a darker skinned Black woman. I can't, right? We all have just different experiences depending on the shoes that we're standing in. And my main message is always to meet that with listening and with compassion, things like that. Meet that experience where they're at. And knowing that you probably will never experience that no matter what you look like or where you're from. So my voice is my experience. And I think that's just critical. If we all sat around listening to each other's experiences more than we did figuring out how it's shaded and colored and all these other things, right? I think that we could just grow a lot more. We could, I think, walk more in our fullness if we did that. So that article, more than anything how much that is core to who I am, and it is based upon my background. And what I love so much about like your book about the stories, it really starts to make you think and resonates. And what are those stories I'm telling myself, and how much are those? Even if I'm saying for me, because I tend to be more positive and uplifting, even when I'm telling those stories and I'm saying how much we can kind of change how we tell them or how we think about them or how it impacts us, there is something that still sees inside the pores sometimes about those stories. And so it's, finding a way to get that negativity that's in the background of the stories, even just outside of the muscles and our psyche and all of those things that we have to work constantly to do. So it's so funny because the stuff that I talk about now, even more from the TED Talk and your story, telling their stories, your book and everything, combine those two things is really, an amazing solution for people who are struggling and stuck right now. So I don't think your book is just about storytelling. I think it's like the solution in so many ways to reverse the negative impacts on the stories we tell ourselves, and then how that then shows itself out into the world and what gifts we can give others or not give them based upon how we use those stories. So I'm thankful for you.
I love that you said that. Thank you. I love that you said that, partly because the word that popped into my head was illuminate. And the way that I'm thinking about this right now more than ever is that we must illuminate our stories in a way that resonates with the people around us. Because that's how relationships can change. That's how we can help people who are frustrated with the world around them be able to share their story, is to illuminate the struggle in a way that lights up the learning, that illuminates the learning. And I'm not saying this very well, but for some reason, I was immediately drawn to this idea of making sure that we're telling the right story to the people who need to hear it.
And also really, truly believing the message of the story. So, one of the things I struggled with when I did that TED Talk a year ago is I only got to tell one side, and I had to, because you have to do it. You have to have a tiny idea. It has to be able to fit on the top of the pen, and it has to be very clear, right? It has to go right through. And so, but then I couldn't tell the other stories. And so at some point I will go back and either flip the story or, I'll be working that into keynotes, right? But there's this idea, kind of a paradox there, where that person who kind of kept me out of circles was also the person who fully lifted me up. I wouldn't have gone to law school if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't have, I wouldn't be as strong as I am today if it wasn't for her. Because she used to always say, keep your chin up. Don't ever let them see you sweat, and she just had this way about her. And she, I couldn't go in her community. I couldn't be seen there. But when she came here, we'd go shopping for kosher food. There was a love there. Right. There was a respect there. And so we were both kind of certain things for each other, while this other yucky stuff was underneath the surface. Life is complex. Relationships are complex, but there was a lot of forgiveness and love and care inside of a relationship that had that backdrop of narrow-mindedness. So, that's the reason why I'm in the place I'm at now. And I was able to write that article. That article that I think, impacted and touched people was because I was able to, I can see the complexity and I can find the forgiveness and the love and the hope, because early on I kind of had that relationship, that real lived relationship right there. And not everybody can say that, Right. That's where
I think it's rare that you can say that, but you and I have been talking about this for years, that I am so grateful for my struggles. I'm grateful for the people that treated me badly, because I learned so much from all of them. And would I do it again? No, absolutely not. Would I choose to be in an environment where somebody was being abusive toward me? No, of course not. And there's so much complexity to those experiences. So I would love to hear about a time when you were able to kind of flip the conversation, when you were being underestimated, or somebody was being bigoted or racist toward you, that you were able to flip it. And I'll give you an example. this was actually unknown. The guy didn't even know that he was being insulting. I was at a bridal shower. It was a mixed bridal shower, and it was called a stock your bar and kitchen shower, and couples were all there. It wasn't just the women or just the men. And I had been mixing margaritas, and I had done the catering for it. And the groom was so happy with, I guess it was like the best guacamole he'd ever had. I don't know. It was weird. And he loved the margarita. And he said, his fiance said, "I don't care if you're Jewish. I want you to come to my wedding." That was one of the comments that evening. And then the other comment was, he was talking to a bunch of his friends, and I was standing in the group, and he said something about how this guy had Jewed him down. Jewed him down. And I looked at him and I said, "Hey." He goes, "What?" And I said, "Did you hear what you just said?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You just said something about a guy who Jewed you down." He goes, "Yeah." And I said, Jewish, Jewed you down. And he goes, "Oh," and his eyes got big. And he's like, "That's not what I meant. I didn't mean it. Like, but," and he's like, he's tripping all over his words, trying not to be offensive to me because he liked me. And he had zero negative experiences with me about being cheap or manipulative or anything in that way. And he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "Thank you. I appreciate the apology. I just wanted to make sure you understood that when you said Jewed me down," because it's just a phrase. And I said, "Well, it's just a phrase to you if you're not Jewish and you don't know the history of it. But to me, it says that you think Jews are manipulative and cheap and taking advantage of people. That's what that says to me when you say Jewed me down." And he's like, that is not, oh my gosh. And I could tell. And I said, "Thank you for being sensitive to it." And then I let it go because this was a celebration. I didn't want to make this about me, but at the same time, it was this perfect opportunity to express something without being offended. Like if I had just gotten angry, the opportunity would have been lost.
I found a kind of a funny, sarcastic way to meet a kind of a little mini microaggression at its head. I'm with you, as you can tell on my writing. I do believe that most of this is a lack of awareness and just ignorance, and it's based on upbringing. And so, I think we as parents and educators have a huge opportunity, to frame the minds and to shape the minds of our little ones, so that maybe they can stand a chance of not falling into that hole of narrow-mindedness. But when I had there'd be people over my life that would say, sister, white guys, mostly all white guys, sister. And I'd say, "Okay, well, here's the thing. I know I'm not your sister because I'm the only child. And I'm also educated. So there's no reason for you to talk to me as if you didn't degrade me in that way." And I would say that, and this with a smile, with Heather's smile. And they'd say, again, kind of like you said, it would have no clue, what's happening. But the same thing would be a man or a person in the South that calls you little lady. It's like, well, number one, I'm pretty sure I'm about 5'9" and I weigh about this. So I'm not little, So
oh my gosh.
It's just kind of almost poking a joke, being a little sarcastic, and not being where I walk away and I'm just angry. I mean, I don't think I've ever had a time, like I said, I think the most offended I've ever been has probably been just the stuff with my family. But even having said that, I remember one story. My grandmother, this is when my grandmother passed away, and I had a choice to make. They weren't going to keep me away from the funeral. I had a choice to make, though. Would I go? I'd never been invited. Would I go? And what would I encounter? And I just debated. And finally I decided I'm going to her funeral. I made a decision. And when I walked in, first was into the house, and they were davening and they were doing all these different things. And the grieving process that they do on the ground and
Shiva,
everything.
Sitting Shiva. And
I was like,
black
wow,
everywhere.
That's
covering the mirrors.
What is that? Yeah. I was like, what is that? And she was like, yeah, and the mirrors were covered. And so, most everybody there, I knew them. There were a couple that were the wives of my cousins. And then they didn't know me, and that was a little strange. But then when I walked when we actually were at the I don't know if it's called the funeral home, but we were there and I walked in and everyone was like, I could hear the whispers. I could hear them. But I decided to walk in with my shoulders up high, and I walked in as the inner circle. So it was my first time in my entire life. I walked in and we were all around, the casket, they were bringing it in, and there was the immediate family and I was there. And my mom made sure I was right there in the middle. I was not in the crowd, and there were more whispers. And it was like, these were Hasidic, very Orthodox Jews.
Oh,
and you could just,
right.
And I just felt like, you know what, I belong here. And another unique little spin is when I went into her home. I hadn't been in her house since I was like 15 or something. And I had gone to her home and went into her bedroom. And you know what I saw there?
A picture of you.
Not just one. On her mirror were lined pictures of all of me, of all my milestones, up her mirror.
Oh.
Nobody else was there, by the way. No other nephew, nobody, no sons, just me.
Oh.
Yeah. That'll go into another book at some point later on, because there's some more stuff I need to talk about and disclose, right?
But that just made my heart break a little bit.
Oh, it is. It's
because she wanted to do this. She wanted you to be there, but she knew that the acceptance of her community was not there.
Yeah. Yeah. That was like, wow, that was
broke my heart a little bit.
To see that. Yeah, exactly. So I think that when you live, whatever experience we live, it doesn't have to be that experience, but we always say, like, you can't have resilience unless you have adversity. And whatever experiences we have to find a way to kind of throw away the shittiness of it, excuse my French, and take the seeds of hope for us and for others. We have to peel those away. And so that's exactly like I told you, when I was reading your book, I couldn't put it down. I was like, because those stories and the kind of the good nuggets and the grains inside those are the things that we have to hold on to. And we need to hold on to those and then share those with others, so that we can be the hope and the light for other people. And even though they need to know the backdrop, they might need to hear that other part of the story. You follow through and you pull through the good points of those real stories that are part of our experiences. So,
and it's also a matter of listening for the good points in somebody else's story. And I think that's something that we miss sometimes. I've only really been digging into that aspect in my coaching in the last 3 years, especially since I started my podcast. I mean, I've always done that in my coaching, but with far more intention since hosting the podcast, because people need to hear it said back to them. What I'm finding is, and I'm actually doing an active listening workshop, a virtual workshop next Wednesday, or I can't remember what the date is, because when we can listen to somebody's story and then pull out the parts that demonstrate their resilience, then they hear it from an outside voice and it helps build their internal voice. So when I hear somebody tell a story, I try to draw in on, oh my gosh, do you realize what you just said? This is what you just said. And how amazing is that, the way you thought about it in this way? And that's when you can see this light go on, like, oh, there's so much more to this story than I was giving credit to.
Love that. Yeah. And I think when you can help people see how truly resilient they are and how much of a fighter they are, like especially in a time right now with just the unrest and the impact of COVID has been tremendous on the world, and our psyches as well. I mean, all of this has. And so, but when you can kind of help them dig in, so good for you to do that workshop. When you help them dig in, it helps them to realize how strong they actually are. I think that's where the beauty's at. And that's where I love that same thing when I'm on my show and I ask them, tell me a time when you were not the best version of you. And what did that look like? And how did you come out of it? And it makes them relive and rehash. And sometimes it feels like they're in a therapy session, right? Because it makes them rethink about those times they weren't so great. And some of them have been just... I was shocked by sometimes wow. And I think they were shocked that they told me. You know
right,
what I mean?
Right. I don't usually share this kind of information, but that's self-reflection.
This is like for the whole world to hear, that kind of thing.
Right. But that's self-reflection. That's what you do, is you pull out this sensibility and practicality in self-reflection. That's the beauty of what you do in your podcast, and what I'm sure is going to come out of your next book. What is the next? Wait, so for our listeners, Heather's first book is called The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty. And I have given it as a gift to a handful of managers that I know, and they've given it as gifts to people they know, because it's so great. What is the second book that you write?
The second one is The Art of Caring Leadership, how leading with heart uplifts teams and organizations. And yes, I did try to, I mean, you can't put every story in. We talked about this before. I tried to highlight the ones that were really kind of like, wow, impactful, either because of the person's background and how they have kind of emerged from that. So there's a level of overcoming that kind of strings throughout the book, and overcoming to still become that person who puts heart out there, puts heart first when engaging with others. And then there's, again, this idea of so it's overcoming, and then what does that do? What does that do to translate into how they make others feel? And so those are the things I tried to highlight. Some of this stuff is just like, and I can hear that, because not only did I read the transcripts, it was like sometimes I'd go back and listen, and I'd be at my desk going, because that's how I am. It's something so good.
A little tear starts to dribble down your eye.
And everybody, my husband, everybody, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, this is just so good. And
so
only
powerful.
People, not everybody might feel it as much as I do, because of the relator and the empathy and all that. So I'm seriously deeply feeling like all of this stuff. And I'm like, I've got to make sure other people feel this. So we'll see if it gets over that. I mean, there's some work to be done, and I think it'll be good.
Well, what I love about how you write and the material, the content that you put out, is the fact that you see people where they are, who they are. They're the thing that is completely missing from what you do is judgment, and that is rare. That is rare. And as hard as I try, as much as my internal dialogue slaps itself, like, why would you even think that? It's so obnoxious sometimes. Just this morning, I noticed something when I was looking on Facebook, and I was like, where did that come from? That's not nice. Like, who is that speaking inside your head? I never, in all the years we've been together and friends and interacting, that is something that has been missing from you from the moment we met, is that judgment. It's just this sense of complete presence. And I just love that about you.
Thank you. I think going back to what I said before, that was a gift given to me through my adversity. It really is. So when you think about it, as a child, I didn't feel good enough, and I was judging myself, wondering why I was short, like what was wrong with me that I couldn't be included in that family. And so then what would happen is every little instance where maybe I saw myself become included, I'd say, oh, it's not them. They're not bad. Like, and I don't know if I'm not that bad, but like there was just, that's a little kid thinking inside of me. But whatever it is, like they're my family. And so, that not judging early on, like, cause I could have easily judged them. I had friends who would be like, how do you still talk to them? Like, how could you love them? That kind of thing.
They're mean people. Right.
Exactly.
Judge. I mean, the word,
and I would be like, mean. Well, yeah. And so that's why now I'm able to just today still give people grace. I feel like I am that voice that says, you know what, like, this is not about perfection. Just loosen up a little bit. Now, I'm not telling you that I'm giving you the okay to go way off rails, because that's not my message either. But my message is that we have to continually be better and to grow, but grow together and be aware of our issues and just work on them. But it's not that you're going to ever reach a place of perfection. I'm not, you're not. So I think I'm probably harder on myself than I am of others, but it's because of that frame of forgiveness. I had to forgive often, frequently as a child, them and other, and my parents for other things that happened that I didn't disclose, right? And so those things are having that way of living. Just for me, that's what it did for me. It may not have done that for someone else, right? It could have created a person who was hated people. Never mind it. It could have produced a lot of, but whatever happened, I think it was a gift from God. I still do think that I was given that grace
and love.
You said
you were clearly loved There was never a
Exactly.
lack of love.
Yep.
And I think that is probably a big part of the difference, because people go one way or the other in struggle. They
Yep.
either get mean and bitter, or they get open and less judgmental. And I have rarely seen anything in between when somebody goes through something traumatic like that, a childhood trauma. And, it just occurred to me as you were speaking, what it is that you bring when I said you lack judgment of people when you're talking to them. There's even more to it. It's that you see people as complicated. You don't look at somebody in one dimension or two-dimensional human. You look at every human in the full 3 dimensions. And
I love it all.
Yes.
And I love
even
it
the
all.
bad parts. Like
I do.
It just occurred to me. I love that. Now I have an image in my head of you and seeing people in the full dimensions, and not seeing one action or one thing they say and creating a whole story about who that person is from that one thing that you experience with them.
Yep.
And that's the difference.
Yep.
That's the difference.
It's huge. It is huge. And I know I live that. Like if I feel myself ever going off track in that regard, because it is who I am. It's just kind of who I am. But sometimes, we all go, I'm not perfect either. And
Right.
I just go, wait a second, like, stop for a second. Let's just consider, we are all human. And so when we are going around and we are like, for this idea of demonizing, I don't know if you can see over time, because you've known me for a while and you see my writing and the stuff I put out there, there's an evolution in the message that's out there. Partly because I started out and I felt like I may have been, demonizing is a strong word, but I would always be talking about leaders and really putting just so much pressure on them. And it may have made people think that I wanted them to be perfect, or that they had to show up 100% every single day as this like most positive, uplifting leader. And over time, this like reality, or kind of like maturity, I think, came into it. And then of course, having more exposure to different leaders, to different employees, to different cultures, to different, right. And seeing that there are gradations and there are complexities
Right.
in each of us. Right. And to realize that each of us, the employees, the managers, the customers, like all of these characters are all going through they all have their own journeys and their own ups and downs, and they don't always meet each other at the peaks and the valleys at the same time. And so knowing that, it's okay, how do we take this person that's in the peak and bring this person's about, and how do we help them meet some more? And that's kind of what everything has been is evolving to for me. And so the message of now I talk a lot about intentionality, because it boiled down to, first it was like, oh yeah, and leaders do this. And then it was like, yeah, leaders, you have the power. It's not about like leadership teams. It's about like leaders individually. And then it was like, not just about people who have titles. It's each of us individually have a choice.
Yes.
Right. And so there was like,
we
wow,
all
like
have
this,
responsibility in this.
Yeah,
we all have
to open us up here.
Whether you're the maintenance person or, the person that's sitting in the C-suite, we all have a responsibility to do this work.
And I remember when I was in Brazil, I was, speaking to folks that were, and I was trying to slow down. They were trying to listen to me, and it went over well. But right at the end, they did this book signing, and it was it was actually before it was at the end before we did the book signing. And there was a person in the audience that said, okay, so I want to make sure that I understand. So you're saying it's not like, I don't have to go blame, it's like head of HR or something. I don't have to go talk about the leadership team. Like, it doesn't really matter. It's actually me. Like, I am the one who gets to like change this experience. Yeah, it's you. And I am not joking. It was just like jaws dropping. And people were like, it was like, boom. And it's like so simple. But
Right.
I think it was almost giving them permission to no longer be victim, to no longer blame, and to stand in their shoes and say, what am I responsible for?
Right.
And that's where we're at today. That's exactly where we're at today.
Right.
What are we responsible for? And we can choose to show up how we want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And one relationship at a time is how that's going to change.
It is so much. So true.
Mm-hmm.
One relationship. And I appreciate the allies. I did an article I put it out yesterday, and it was about allies and and allies is a word they use in diversity inclusion space, but it is those people who are, standing by your side, willing to do the fight for you, whether they actually are perpetrators of that battle, they are there with you. And they see the role they play, and they stay there with you. And so this last article I just did is about that, and how much I appreciate people like you, Sarah, who I do consider someone who is an ally. And we all have a role to play. We all have a role to play.
We do. I think that's the hardest thing for me, being a white woman in a world, actually a community that's majority white. And I will show up for the protest on Sunday. I'll go to the Capitol building, even though we might have a dozen people of color in the whole city. No, more than that, but it's limited. We do have an indigenous community that is abused and treated badly, and have far too many people incarcerated in relation to the size of their population. So Montana does have a lot of work to do. It's hard, though, for me to figure out where I can be an ally, where I can be powerful with my voice, while amplifying the voices of those who need to be heard, because my voice comes through. I know it does. And so how do I use it, but also take the step back to bring others up? And I think a lot of us, Amy Blaschka refers to that guilt that a lot of people feel, even before the race issues that have come to light finally, in such a big way. Even before that, Amy was talking about the guilt of those of us who have homes and jobs that we can do from home. And we know other people were struggling through this pandemic and struggling with the shutdowns and the economy. And how do we address that guilt? And for me, it's not so much guilt as it is this eagerness to participate. Like, how do I make this better for the people that I love? And that's not just people of color, but even my white counterparts that don't know what to do, or that feel this strange change coming on where they actually have to address issues that they didn't ever have to address before, like teaching their children what racism is. And I have to tell you, I was surprised and a little discouraged at the number of people that I know with kids that have said, I don't even know how to talk to my kids about race and prejudice. Like, what do I do? How do I present this? And I thought, wait a minute, you haven't been talking about this? How can you not have been talking about this? But I realize we talk about it because we're Jewish in a town where there are very few Jews, in a state where there are very few Jews. And our friends are musicians and people of color. And, our community, we talk about those things. But a lot of the people I know, that's not part of their world because we're in Montana. They're not exposed to it, so they didn't talk about it with their kids. So that's where I'm, finding ways to contribute, which is, it's hard. It's not an easy place to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and seeing what I would say about those people who didn't speak about race before, I would say, there's no better time than today. So I'm not, just as you brought up before, I'm not going to judge the past because we've all fallen short in our own way. We all have a role to play. This is that whole point of having a role to play. We all have a role to play in what just happened to George Floyd. It's because it's a larger picture, and we all have a role to play in the solution as well. And so right now, it's like there's just no better time to start than today.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that is a perfect way to wrap this up, because we started with a discussion about being an ambassador for your people, about making sure that you are doing what you can in this moment to represent yourself and your story in a way that resonates and that inspires. And then ending with the name George Floyd and the fact that we can start today. This isn't something that happened 10 years ago. This is today. And we have a great opportunity to represent whoever we represent, wherever we are, in a positive light, in an open, non-judgmental, positive light.
Yep.
Mm. I love you.
I love you too.
So,
virtual hug. That's what it's going to be. Virtual hug.
Yeah, virtual hugs.
You.
For our listeners, this has been Heather Younger, author of The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, TEDx Colorado Springs speaker, and soon to be a second-time author, and the Art of Caring Leadership. I love that because it puts it right up front that this is how things are going now. Like in Kimberly Davis's book, Brave Leadership, it's command and control style just doesn't work anymore. I don't know that it ever worked that well, but it definitely doesn't work now. And so your book is going to be another great compliment to hers and to your first book. And I'm so grateful for your friendship.
Thank you. Me as well. You know that you're a light for me. So thank you.
Well, one last thing for our listeners, I will include links to Heather's website, to her TEDx, and to her first book in the blog post associated with this podcast. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. If you're planning an event or company retreat and want to bring in a memorable, entertaining, and highly practical speaker as your keynote speaker or workshop facilitator, please visit us at elkinsconsulting.com to learn how we can help and provide a memorable keynote or breakout session. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from you.
Now listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going away?